Welcome to Encountering Christ, a podcast about meeting Jesus in the ordinary moments of life, learning how to invite others into those encounters, and exploring practical ways to recognize Jesus at work in our daily rhythms. Our prayers at this time helps you see and share Christ more clearly. Today we move forward with our quest. We're continuing to talk about God's communicable attributes, but we're moving from the category of God's moral attributes into the category of God's attributes of purpose. And in this category of God's attributes of purpose, we begin with God's will. And here's our definition. God's will is that attribute of God whereby He approves and determines to bring about every action necessary for the existence and activity of Himself and all creation. In simple terms, we're talking about what God wants. Just take a moment to think about what God wants. And think about it looking back and seeing the results of what God wants. Then think about what God wants right now. And then think about what God wants in what we would call the future. Now, of course, God is beyond time, so there's no past or future for Him, at least not in the way that we understand it. But for us, we understand things in time. So let's begin by looking backwards. If we look backwards, what is the will of God? Well, God wanted, He willed, He wanted to create the world. God wants all of humanity to be saved. God wants us to freely choose Him. God wants us to see Him. But God also wants us to get a taste of what existence would be like without Him. And those two things are communicated at the same time at the cross. For at the cross, we see the results of our sin and the grace and love of God colliding. And God wants us to see that. It is His will that we see it. In fact, the entire creation, all of its beauty, wonder, and perfection display that God wants us to see His eternal nature and divine power. And notice this, in order for us not to see God in what is created, it requires a specific act of the will of man. In this way, we can see that the will of man rejects the will of God, which brings us to the present. Can we sense the will of God even in this present moment? If you just take a moment and in silence, you can almost feel His will. And what is His will communicating? Love, goodness, mission, power, and so much more. When we begin our prayer each day with, "Your will be done," we are surrendering to His desire, His will. We're surrendering to what God wants. And when we do this, there is peace, joy, and love and power within the will of God. But toward what end? Well, the will of God looking forward is already written down for us. God's will is that He would be our God and we would be His people. That is what God wants. Listen to how God communicates His plan for bringing us to Himself. It's in Jeremiah chapter 30, and it speaks of Jesus to come and what God wants all at the same time. It's Jeremiah chapter 30, starting in verse 21. It says this, "Their leader will be one of their own. Their ruler will arise from among them. I will bring him near, and he will come close to me. For who is he who will devote himself to be close to me?" Now he's talking about Jesus there. Then he says this, "So I'm doing all of this so you will be my people, and I will be your God." You see, the will of God is to save us through His one and only Son, Jesus Christ, so that through Him we may become God's people. That is the will of God, that we become His people. that He is our God and we are His people. That is His will, and that will of God, it surrounds us, it fills us, it drives us. You can feel the will of God at all times if you desire to do so. And that's my encouragement to you today. Receive and walk and live within the will of God, for that is where eternity is found. God bless and have a good day.